Welcome to this session of Workforce Reimagined. My guest today is Captain Jonathan Carter, the director of the Force Design 2028 implementation team for the Coast Guard. Captain Carter, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Jason, thanks for having us.
This timing of our discussion is perfect because the Coast Guard recently issued their Force Design 2028 execution plan. And I think there's so much interesting things in there that really talks about how the Coast Guard is reimagining their workforce, both today and going forward. So let's just start with the execution plan. Give me some highlights. What are some of the top line things you think are most interesting and most important for people to know?
Yeah, Jason, and first of all, thanks for letting us come today to talk about Force Design. We're really excited about the changes that are going to take place across our Coast Guard. I think Force Design is it's a monumental effort to change how we operate and how we're structured within our Coast Guard for one specific purpose, which is to be a more agile, more capable, and more ready fighting force for the American people. Force Design 2028 is unique. It started outside of our Coast Guard with the Secretary of Homeland Security. It's resourced through reconciliation. It covers every part of our Coast Guard, not just a specific part. Recent change initiatives inside of our Coast Guard, only focused on talent management or maybe people or how we're going to replace a certain ship. This touches everything under the four pillars. And then finally, it's based off of operational outcomes. And I think that's the most important thing and something that excites me as an operator. Anything that we do under Force Design that doesn't deliver a better product for the American people is not worth us considering. So, four categories: people, organization, technology, contracting, and acquisition. And we are going to re-envision processes, how we develop, train, and grow our workforce, and then how we employ that workforce with certain capabilities to get after future mission sets.
And I know under each of those categories, there are specific goals, there are specific kind of timelines. Since we are Workforce Reimagined, I'm going to ask you to start with the people side of that. One of the things that stood out to me was the goal to hire, and I may get the number wrong, something to the effect of 15,000
Yep.
new service members in the coming years. Let's start there. That's a big lift. That's not easy to do.
It's huge, and you're right, it's not easy to do. But what we need to do, what we must do, is increase readiness and resiliency across our workforce. The goal is by the end of 2028 to increase our Coast Guard by 15,000 members. Now, that's a combination of civilian, active duty, reserve members. Before this job, Jason, I was the chief of enlisted personnel, and I was responsible for staffing our Coast Guard, the active duty workforce. And as much as we struggled with workforce shortages on the active duty side, the reserve side was in worse shape and for a longer period of time. We have civilian vacancies across our Coast Guard. We are hiring. We've hired 120 new civilian hires since March. But we recognize, particularly on the contracting and acquisition side, we are deficient in the number of contracting officers we have across our Coast Guard. So, yes, an absolute monumental task, but we're beefing up our recruiting enterprise. We're looking at new and unique ways to train members once they come through the accession source, because we can't have them just come into our Coast Guard and then bog down on the backside. So we're looking to increase training quotas. We're even considering a new training center. We have 8 within our Coast Guard. We're looking to develop a ninth to be able to, capture that 15,000 number that the Secretary has challenged us to achieve. Yes, it's going to be hard, but readiness and resiliency are the key. That's what we need to move the needle and achieve increased mission outcomes for our nation.
I want to delve into kind of that side of how you're going to kind of bring those people on. And then we can also talk a little bit about the training, because once you have them on, as you said, you
Yes.
can't let them be bogged down. I think that sometimes is the big challenge. Let's start with the civilian vacancies. You said you already hired about 120 people since March. Or what kind of job areas are you looking to fill? How are you looking at civilians differently in terms of what your needs are, how to bring them on? How does the force design kind of start to take that into account and make changes?
Well, there's a specific key enabler in there that addresses the onboarding of civilian personnel. We're looking to condense that, make it more effective. There's a technological aspect of it to make sure that they have the devices that they need, the systems that they need to be able to execute that job, and that they sustain control of those technology enablers over the course of their career and tenure in the Coast Guard. I mentioned the contracting personnel. I'm Force design, in my mind, is funded through reconciliation. The commandant refers to them as binary stars. From a distance, they look like the same thing. They're really not. However, a $25 billion investment in our Coast Guard. And I would say right now we recognize that we don't have that contracting support to be able to make that happen. Um, and so we're working with the department to beef up those contracting numbers to support that on the civilian side. On the active duty side, we're building out right now what that pyramid needs to look like. It may look more like a diamond, in the future to be able to support that. But we recognize that we can't just build the base. Because of the new acquisitions that we're going to bring into the Coast Guard, we have to build up the middle, potentially first, and make sure that we have the right people trained at the right time to meet mission demands.
And then the third piece of this is the reserve. You mentioned maybe the reserve has been, I'll use the term neglected. You probably didn't
Sure.
say that. Maybe underappreciated, you didn't spend enough time on it. How are you starting to look at the reserve as well?
Yeah, so I'll go out on a limb, Jason, to tell you all those words apply. The our reserve workforce uh, brings a tremendous capability, and that's truly what it is a capability to our service, especially in responding to contingencies and crises, things that we can't plan for, hurricanes, flooding. We always say, you never know who the country is going to call in a crisis. And we saw this last month whenever there was severe flooding on a river in central Texas. Who would have thought they would have called the Coast Guard? They did, and we were able to respond. It's being able to respond to contingencies and crises like those that we rely on a healthy reserve force. We do not have that. They've been so depleted, we've basically been using them to patch up holes in our active duty workforce. So we're looking to significantly increase the size of our workforce. We're looking to focus them into 4 mission sets so they're not so broadly focused, but really where we need them to respond in a crisis. This is nested under the people table or the people pillar of force design. And it's one of the more exciting parts. And I'm an active duty officer. I was responsible for staffing our active duty workforce. We could not have done that without a strong reserve force, and we haven't had that in the last few years.
Do you get a sense of why the reserve force was needs more attention? Is it just people don't think of, oh, I could join the Coast Guard Reserve the same way people think I could join the Army Reserve or the Navy or the Air Force? Yes. Or did you guys at the Coast Guard maybe it was lesser of a priority than maybe the active duty and then the civilians? And how do you change that mindset as well?
Yeah, so what I would just say is that times are good until they're not. And for the longest time, times were good, in our Coast Guard. It was about 2015 where we divested of a bunch of recruiting centers because times were very, very good. And then they were not. We never really had to be great recruiters as a service because the Coast Guard missions, the people in the Coast Guard really do a great job of selling itself. Um, but times changed as we approached COVID. The economy is shifting frequently, um, and so we really just it hasn't been a focus for us. We were content with the state of our reserve workforce. We know that contingencies now, and more importantly, contingencies in the future, that the status quo is no longer acceptable. We have to beef up that part of our workforce. We have to rethink about how we're using the Coast Guard Auxiliary, civilian volunteers who spend time on mission supporting Coast Guard active duty members. Um, and so there's a lot of changes afoot. It starts with building up that base for our reserve workforce and then applying them to mission sets, these 4 mission sets at which they're going to provide. And we're going to get most return on our investment in supporting Coast Guard missions.
Have you or do you plan to have any conversations with some of the military in terms of their reserves, in terms of, hey, what are you guys doing that is working, and can
Yep.
we beg, borrow, and steal from you?
We've been having those conversations for years, Jason, and it's we hate to use the word steal, right? But we do recognize that there are soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, guardians that may have joined a service and they might feel that they're not the right fit, and the Coast Guard might be the right fit for them. So what we're doing is we're breaking down those barriers. We're making sure that we're using the same accession requirements, right? So that we're not creating artificial barriers to coming into to our service to be able to make that happen. We're also looking for additional training capacity from them because that was one of your first questions is once you get them in, how do we keep them from getting backed up right when they get through the accession source. So we're looking for opportunities to not only achieve quotas but accession capacity. How can we use joint service accession sources to increase the number of members we're bringing into our Coast Guard each year?
Broadening the conversation a little bit, not just to the reserve, but to active duty civilians. Let's talk about the recruitment side a little bit. You mentioned potentially adding a ninth training center. I know that that's kind of after you brought them in, but what else are you doing from a recruiting side? Are you looking at some other innovative ways, or how does force design start to say, okay, how do we do the things a little different?
Yeah, so one, we're looking at increasing the technology in the hands of our recruiters to increase mobile recruiting. We're looking at, and we've already started going down this path, is remote recruiting. So maybe a place where we don't have a recruiting office, but we can assign a member to where they live out of their home and they make the rounds in that community to try to beef up accessions in our Coast Guard. We're breaking down barriers to accession. So we're issuing more medical waivers, or when we can get rid of that requirement that requires that waiver, we're trying to, again, remove those barriers.
Interesting. You talk about getting the tech in the hands of the recruiters, mobile recruiting. Obviously, we all have our cell phones these days. Smartphones are the norm. So, is it more of uh, doing what with those phones, with the tablets, with the laptops? How are you looking at mobile recruiting in a new way, or even
It,
remote recruiting?
Yeah, no, great question, right? And I hate to use the word compete, but all of the services are competing over the same pool of candidates who are willing to sacrifice and serve in the United States military. And so when we're able to do this remotely with the right technology and expedite that process, we're more likely to win that candidate. What we're trying to do candidate. If that candidate has to wait another service, whether it's military service, whether it's a commercial organization that's that number, you know, you can't lead from the stern. And if we're not matching the capabilities that they breed, the speed in hiring, then we're going to lose that candidate. So that's what that effort is all.
Captain Carter, let me circle back to the 2028 execution plan a little bit, and maybe have you go through some of the key enablers of the people campaign. I know we hit upon them, but I want to give folks maybe a very specific, what are some of the short-term goals, some of the long-term goals? What should folks look out for as you start to execute this plan?
Yeah, so we hit one of them right off the bat, and it's the biggest, and that's that we need to increase readiness and resiliency across our Coast Guard, and we want to do that by setting the lofty goal of bringing 15,000 more people into our Coast Guard. Um, we need to when we talk about people, the next thing we talk about is training. We're looking to increase quotas across our Coast Guard. We're looking to some of the specifics are we talked about training center number 9 and the opportunity to be able to do that. But it also talks about a key enabler is beefing up our existing training centers to make sure we're getting max value from those facilities as well. Um, we've asked every single unit or program within our Coast Guard to identify their training needs so we can identify the real requirements of what we need. We've always lived in kind of this deficit mindset in the Coast Guard that we're willing to do more with less. That's not true. In a modern military fighting force, you have to understand the reality of the problem set. We've been afraid to ask that question. We're not anymore. So we've asked every single unit for every single billet to tell us what your training requirements are so that we can develop the requirements holistically as a Coast Guard to figure out how we're going to fund it, how we're going to source it, and how we're going to schedule our members to be able to attend that training. Um,
I think the deficit mindset is very interesting because one of the things I've heard over my career covering the government is, well, when you got to cut costs, training is the first to go. Except for it seems like in the military side, training is so important because readiness is
yeah.
so important that that's kind of the one uh, difference between maybe the civilian agencies. Have you also, though, Coast Guard generally struggled with maybe not all training, but certain aspects of training, such as we can pick on technology, right? Hey, do we
Yeah.
have the latest and greatest people who can use AI? That's the buzzword of today, of course. Or but cybersecurity 5 years ago or cloud 7 years ago. Has that been the big challenge for you? Or talk a little bit more about that deficit mindset.
Yeah, so it's been a huge challenge. So those things, quite frankly, with resource constraints, have not prioritized well through our budgeting process. Um, ForceCom, our major training command within the Coast Guard, has done a great job of finding innovative ways to increase training quotas and improve the quality of training. But yes, this is where we're going with force design is more remote training opportunities, um, incorporating AI, and VR, virtual reality, is huge in the training community. Something that we're not maximizing right now that we plan to do in the future. Um, you know, the biggest problem that we've had in terms of training is when you have a personnel shortage, it's hard to get people to training. Or when you are able to get people to training, they've already reported to the unit that they're supposed to have that training for, and they're not trained fully to do that job. And then when they finally get a quota, it comes open, they go to training, and that unit doesn't get a replacement for them. And it's been, that is not resiliency, right? That's not fair to the member. It's not fair to the unit. It's not fair to the member's shipmates who has to hold down 2 jobs while they're away. Um, so we're trying to bridge that gap, and that's one where really it bridges that gap. It all falls under the people pillar of force design, being able to make that happen. How are we bringing them in, and how are we training them? And that's the key piece to Force Design 28.
The virtual reality piece is exciting. I got to ask you, Captain Carter, have you had a chance to test anything out? Have you had a chance to use it?
Yeah, I have actually, and it is pretty neat. Now you have to sometimes you have to have the bandwidth to support it, so it's good for certain units and perhaps not for others. But really, where I've seen the virtual reality piece play a significant role is um, uh, maintenance and mechanics and how to repair engines, how to repair transmissions. And yeah, I've worn it, and you can physically move the parts and almost rehearse what you need to do to be able to affect repairs on certain systems.
Very cool. I know that was a big push. I don't know, felt like 5, 7, 10 years ago. Oh, VR is the next, and then it just never lived up. But I think that people found their niche in training
Yeah.
specifically, like as you mentioned. So I
A-
appreciate you sharing that.
And I think an important piece to that is it cuts down on that brick and mortar time as well, right? Because if you have the VR equipment, you know, you don't need the facilitators, you don't need a classroom full of students. So it buys you bandwidth, it buys you capacity to put your resource somewhere else to gain efficiency and a return on investment.
The other side of the training is you got to have the people to do the training. So I imagine among that 15,000 people that you're looking to hire or replace people who can bring in to do that some of that training, is that also part of this discussion right now? Hey, do we have enough educators? Do we have enough of courses? Is that all also
Yeah.
being looked at?
So not right now, but this is the brilliance of Force Design 28. So right now we're focused on uh, active duty workforce, our reserve workforce, and our civilian workforce. Our active duty workforce, we know we need to bring on at least 500 more recruiters. We know we need to bring on at least 500 more medical personnel. But the brilliance of Force Design is as we're executing it, it's going to be fluid. We're going to be able to add things to it. Um, and for our people campaign, they will have an initial task list of things that we want them to accomplish, and that task list is nested under the execution plan summary. But there is an ability to add to it because of those outcome tables, because everything is outcome based. If we are not moving the operational needle, the outcome tables will be able to influence the type of people that we bring in our Coast Guard or the type of training we need to get after certain mission sets.
That flexibility, which you mentioned at the very top of our discussion, is always so important whenever you have not just these plans, but when you're really talking about the people side, because the
Yeah.
need you have today may not be the need you have 6 months from now, 2 years from now. So I appreciate you that. Captain Carter, we're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we'll continue our conversation. My guest is Captain Jonathan Carter, the director of the Force Design 2028 implementation team at the Coast Guard.